This is Ashley Newby, and you're listening to the Black Studies Podcast, a Mellon Grant sponsored series of conversations examining the history of the field. Our conversations engage with a wide range of activists and scholars, senior figures in the field, late doctoral students, cultural workers, political organizers, and everyone in between in order to explore the cultural and political meaning of Black studies as an area of inquiry and its critical methods. On today's episode of the Black Studies Podcast, we have the pleasure of speaking with Tahirah Akbar-Williams, librarian for the Department of African American and Africana Studies and the College of Education at the University of Maryland, College Park. Previously, she served as the education librarian and a faculty associate at the School of Education at Johns Hopkins University. Tahirah received her Master of Library Science and a Master of Arts in African American and African Diaspora Studies from Indiana University, Bloomington. She finished her studies at The Ohio State University, where she taught women's studies and received a Master's of Arts. Tahirah has presented at numerous conferences and received awards, such as the James Partridge Honor for Outstanding African American Information Professional Award. She was selected as an ALA Emerging Leader and an ALA Spectrum Scholarship. She served as the convener for ACRL's African American Studies Librarians Interest Group and the historian for the Association of the Study of African American Life and History Informational Professionals. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Black Studies Podcast. Today, we have the pleasure of speaking with Tahirah Akbar-Williams, librarian for the African American and Africana Studies Department and the College of Education at the University of Maryland. Hi, Tahirah. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fine, Ashley, and thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. I know we do have a time limit today, so I want to dive in. What drew you as a librarian to focus on Black studies and Black life? And feel free to talk about any formative experiences that might have brought research, information, and Black life together for you.
Yeah, so I really was just curious, like a lot of people, just always curious and have questions as to why is this way? How did this get this way? And two, about African Americans. And so I grew up in an all Black neighborhood, and then I moved to an all white neighborhood. And the education that I received there and the acculturation or fitting into the culture, learning the culture in each space, clearly was very different. And I wanted to know more about me, where I came from, the people who look like me, the history of African Americans in this country. And so I just, started taking courses and reading, and I was just intrigued by Black life and the history of just this dynamic history of African Americans in this country and what we've done. And so that moved me into doing more research. And then as I was doing my research, I learned about the field of library and information science. I started to learn more about library and information science, ask people questions, and then found out that I could, continue my studies. And I was interested in Black studies as well as women's studies and librarianship. I found out through academic librarians who were helping me with my research that I could go into LIS and I can focus on the things that I was already doing, which was African American studies and women's studies. And I was doing a little, administration of justice law. I was looking at all those things, the criminal justice system, et cetera, et cetera. So I had a librarian who said, hey, you can, still focus on those fields and integrate that into your library work. And then I was off to the races after that.
So I want to elaborate or ask some follow-up questions with that, right? So I know you do have a master's in African American and African Diaspora Studies. You also have a master's in Women's Studies, and you have your master's of Library Science. So where do you see, or how do you see the overlap or intersections of those different fields manifesting in not only your own interests, your research interests personally, but also in the type of work that you do as a librarian?
Yeah, so the fields of African American studies and women's studies came into the academy through protest, through women, African Americans fighting these, ivory towers to put into the curriculum the discipline of women's studies and African American studies as legitimate forms of research. That we look at these things, and that fascinated me because we can't see the world in a monolith. I feel like you have to look at it very nuanced, and that's looking at the myriad of perspectives that people who have experience and come into this world and this life and they go through. And so to have a very homogenous view of the world and to say that, we don't need to study world history and race and gender and classics and politics and also to look at those things through the lens of the individuals going through them, it just didn't make any sense to me. And that I still believe that that's how white supremacy thrives, when we don't take into account everything and everyone's perspective. We are only, I think they say the winners are the ones who write history, and that is the problem. And so that is the thing that really propels my work and encourages me, because I know we live in a society that is more and more I don't know if the word pluralistic would be, that's the proper word actually. But people are coming in from, in terms of particularly in this country, but globally, just the migration, the patterns, particularly here, of people and population change in this country. We saw it with the last census that by 2054, excuse me if that number is incorrect, that this country will be a majority minority country. And I think that's what has gotten some people into a panic. And I don't believe we should panic. I think we should prepare for living in society where we have to understand each other as Americans and how we got here and how we all experience the American or have our American experience different. You know what I'm saying? Different. So we know that, enslaved Africans who were brought here, we know that there were Native Americans here. We know that, in terms of Mexico and the Spanish conquest, and just all these things that we have to take into account when we look at this great country, and how do we hold and live in a society where we recognize all of that and pull that together to build the next stepping stone for us to move forward together. And I know we're going to talk about AI, but I think that eventually, we talk about AI. I know we chatted about it, and we have the class that we're working on, but also just in context to this whole big new idea that's supposed to change the world. And it's like, okay, how do you change the world with a platform that you did not have the people at the table who are going to be affected by that platform, right? We know that a lot of these systems that are being developed, it's one woman that just broke away from ChatGPT, and she's a woman of color and started her own AI. She's getting crowdfunding, I think, for her own AI software. But it's understanding that we all have to have a stake and be at the table and be in the creative process when we're working with these technologies. Because if we don't, it'll be the same thing as how the Constitution was written.
Right.
And whose perspective was there, at the table at that time. And we know that that's problematic now, right? Well, hopefully. So.
Yeah. I mean, we know that it's problematic. I don't know how many other people currently feel it's problematic, but yes.
We know that because of the limits of what was done initially at the beginning of what this so-called perfect union they were trying to form, that we had amendments to the Constitution, right? We are going to hold up to that preamble and those words and that statement in that Constitution, then we have to change this to open up, to make this tent a little bigger, right? And so that right there has been the galvanizing force behind me continuously working with, in my bag of women's studies and African American studies with library science and pushing things forward, but also using that to critique things like AI to say that, hey, we read Ruth Benjamin, we read Algorithms of the Oppressed, we were talking about that, and there's people still sounding the alarm bells and saying, hey, hello, to take these perspectives into consideration. And why do we keep having to tell you this if you know that we live in a society where we all are different, and we come from different places and we have different needs, right? We don't just look at the world in one way.
Mhm.
And there's no way to, you don't, to normalize that is ridiculous, to say that we all see the world in one way, and therefore the technology, for example, AI that's built, is going to come in and help everybody in the different ways that they need their help. And it's going to see and understand your history and perspective in the way you need it. And so I was reading up on, you and I we read many articles, but the articles that were talking about the problems that AI can cause in the health sector if it goes, if it is not properly formulated in the way in which formulated to not reproduce the isms, right? So
Mhm.
the health disparities between Black and white folk, particularly, we know that Black women's infant mortality rates now are similar to women having babies in Mexico. And Mexico is supposed to be a developing world country, and we're supposed to be a developed country, right? So that we know that this has happened you know, with Black women in this country, then the medical AI has to speak to that. But unfortunately, the medical profession is just realizing that this is going on after the alarm bells being sounded, right? So, a couple of these articles were saying that this is a danger, right? The danger is thinking that that AI is going to solve a problem that we can solve, right? That we are not even doing very well with, right? How is it supposed to usurp our own biases, right? If it's baked into the system. So that's why I think it is so important to keep African American, Africana studies, and women's studies, and at the forefront of looking at how technology affects the lives of people of difference, right? And you have multicultural studies. California is big on that. Asian American, Latino American, all these things, all these different disciplines to help you understand how AI can serve the multitudes.
Mhm.
So that's kind of why I'm so passionate about this, because it'll touch everything. And AI is the next big thing, but whatever it is, you're always going to deal with humanity, and humanity is just that, right? All of us in the different ways we embody, right? This embodiment happens, and so there needs to be people at the forefront of it saying, "Hey, have you considered? Have you looked at?" And in order for us to all be, to benefit from this technology. And so that's kind of where I enter into the conversation and why I'm so passionate about it.
Thank you. I think that was a lot of important reminders about particularly where we're at right now with AI and the increasing integration of technology into our daily lives in multiple ways. Um, I want to ask follow-up with regards to that, right? So especially right now where we have a literal erasure of databases and information and the defunding of studies that are on topics like infant mortality rates. Um, what role do you think that libraries and librarians, right, can play in trying to mitigate or address some of the vacancies that are being intentionally put into our public record and the loss of that type of data?
Well, thank you for that question. I've talked to library colleagues, and we've always talked about, I think they call it information agnostic, meaning that, I don't judge the questions you're asking me. My job as an information professional is to get you that information, to
Mhm.
scholarly peer-reviewed sources and that gray material and anything else you need to do your work. I'm not here to regulate you. I'm not here to say you can't read or study that. We don't take an oath as librarians, but we do take do have a perspective about information. And for us, it is to ensure that you have everything you need. And so we are not censoring anything in terms of what you need for your education. And when we deal with the government and society, or people in power, shall we say, shifting that perspective, as librarians, we stand up and say, hey, we don't have those filters on information. We're here for education and for people to learn. So when we go back based on our mission statement of libraries and, the direction of your particular university, a mission statement and values and all that, the stuff that, you put in front of you and say, this is what we stand on, then we come back and say, okay, these are our principles. These are our values. This is our mission statement. So we hold true to these things. Therefore, we will continue to provide the information that our population needs. We will continue to provide the scholarly, peer-reviewed sources that our students and faculty need to do their work. And it doesn't have an ideology. It doesn't have a perspective. It's just the information. And so we hold the line on that. And colleagues, we've been talking about that and how to support that, because that is, when it comes to libraries, that's in public library, academic library, specialty library. Our job is to educate you, provide you, with the resources so you can get the education you need. I can't tell you what you need. I can just say, hey, these are the materials that you can use to find what you need. And so in terms of databases, et cetera, I sent your colleague, and I think he's going to push this out. They did it in the education department, just different information about, for example, what's happening in the government now and what's happening with web pages and information, and how to get information before it's deleted off of sites, so you'll have it, things like that librarians can help support you on, because you need some information from a government page that they say is going to be deleted. Well, librarians get together and say, okay, what's out there that we can store this, right? And so some people have brought up the Wayback Machine and different things like that. For example, in the pandemic, remember, we couldn't come in, so we had to rely a lot on online open source and sometimes paid for resources from people who digitize things. For example, Hockley Trust, there you go. They digitized a lot and gave access that helped our students and faculty. So things like that we come up with and say, hey, how can we, support our faculty, students, and our population in getting the resources that they need under these very trying times. And of course, the pandemic was a very trying time, and we scrambled and libraries got it together, and were able to provide resources. There was a rough patch, as you know, I'm sure everybody knows. And now that we're in this other iteration of how the political environment of how people want information shared, librarians are again coming together, scrambling and saying, how can we ensure that we have the quality and that we have the necessary things that they need, our student, faculty, staff, to do their work. And we just scramble, and then we put information out, send it out to the departments, and put it up on websites for you to be able to have what you need to access it. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. And it also made me think about some of the other benefits or services, right, that libraries and librarians provide. I know that you have given workshops in my classes before and in classes of faculty across the university, but even thinking about the role that librarians play in teaching people how to consume information and understanding what should be considered valid sources of information and how to have that media literacy piece. And I wonder, did you want to say anything about the role that librarians and libraries can play in increasing the media literacy of people? Because that's something that's definitely needed right now.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. So we call it information literacy, where when I'm teaching a class, I talk to you about where you find scholarly and reputable sources, how to identify if a source is a .com, or who wrote this particular source and what their qualifications are. right? Because that in an academic environment is very important. If I'm at home and I am calling myself an expert at whatever, and I have a whole website dedicated to whatever I'm saying, or I write these articles that are dedicated to the position that I tell you that I'm in, but I don't have the credentials to back that up, problematic. And so you need to know how to be literate in terms of how to reading that information. You need to understand who, what, where, why, and then how to properly assess that information. So information literacy is very important. And two, when we have students in our class, I did a diversity immersion program, and part of that program was to help young African American males learn about library and information science. And a part of that was teaching a media literacy class about, just online environments, posting things, Instagram, social media, who can read it, what's out there, privacy, just different things like that, how to post, how to, responsibly use the technology, right? Because a lot of students didn't know, hey, if I post this on Facebook, you mean an employer can look at this? If I post my Instagram account with all this wild stuff, and then I'm leaving graduate school to go into a professional position, and I have all this stuff on my Instagram that it is open for my employer or fellowship committee to go and look at that. So how to be responsible, how to understand in this new environment how these platforms can help you in terms of putting out your professional projects, projecting a professional persona, showing all your competent and wonderful work that you've done and the level of your expertise. So those platforms are wonderful for that. And then they can be a little ratchet, right? And then we have to say, okay, so if you're going in the ratchet direction, understand that there's consequences to that, and there's ways to, have your fun online, be responsible. But this is the information literacy part that we're talking about. You need to understand these platforms. You need to understand the social media, these different technologies, how to use them to help you move you forward into the world, and then how they can be used to hurt you. So that is about, looking at, when you come to doing anything, assessment. And so that information literacy piece with authority and looking at, who created it, how many times it was updated, just different things like that we teach. So yeah, that's very important. So librarians, I'm going to step back for a second, because librarians do a myriad of things. We have our own conferences. We have public library conferences, academic library conferences, a general ALA conference. And then we also, my colleagues have their own articles and books, and we publish. I have my little articles, and focus on how to, teach better information literacy to students, how to support faculty better, what we can do to help with coursework, and how we can use, ELMS, et cetera, to, being embedded in a class, which I was going to talk to you about, to have my LibGuide there on your course guide, so your students can refer to that. Just different ways we can support you. So we write about that. We present at conferences. We have poster sessions. And then within our particular department, we talk about some of the needs we're seeing as of late of our faculty and students, and how we can pivot and support. And so there's a lot that librarians do. And I thank you for asking that question and pointing to that on campus, that people don't even know, because they say, oh, wow, you guys are faculty members, and you also, publish and present, and you do, all of this, and you work with us on our stuff. And it's like, yes, this is a profession. And in this profession, it is multifaceted. So we do a lot of different things. And that's what really brought me to the profession, is that you just don't have to, teach. You can do, again, I created a program. I have other colleagues who are doing, who are teaching classes. You and I are working on a class for undergraduate students on AI. And so it is a beautiful field to be in, but we do have our issues with, like every field. My field is, largely homogeneous. It's not a very diverse field. And, we've been doing a lot of talking about how to increase diversity in the field, but we haven't been doing the work on it, So it's a nice idea now, but the work is not being done at the level that it should be. And which is unfortunate, because this is, in terms of the future of information and technology, libraries are a really strong hub for growing and building that, and for creating just wonderful partnerships. For like you and I have a partnership, and your colleague, Marshall Washington. We've done some work in the past before that's really benefit students in African and Africana studies. So African American Africana studies. So that's kind of the field, and how we can serve campus, and how we work with our faculty, and how we build, and how some of there's so much. There's preservation, so many different departments. It would really blow your top. You're thinking, wow, I never knew that libraries were so in depth, that there were so many different departments and so much work that goes in on the back end. A lot of people don't know that. So thank you for that question. And yeah, I would encourage people listening to this podcast to go out and interview your librarians, and then talk to them about resources and what's available, and just not just that, but how faculty and librarians, which they do often, can collaborate on projects to benefit students and faculty in the campus.
Thank you for that. I know that there is a lot of work that happens in the library. I know that you've done a lot of work to support the faculty in our department, and we have worked together personally. So I know that there is a wealth of experience and knowledge and skill that you bring to that collaborative effort on the academic side, but also thinking about, like you said, the information literacy, the media literacy, and helping students to understand what it means to be able to use those skills, not just in their 4 years of college or however many years if they're grad students, but in their daily lives as well, and being able to interpret and understand the legitimacy of sources and the representations that are present digitally is key to that. So thank you for elaborating on that a little bit. So what would you say interests you most about the path of Black studies in both critical and excited senses? I know that you have your educational background, but then you also have the work that you do related to Black studies today.
I am passionate about Black studies programs, curriculum. This is the American experience, and we have to help people understand how very nuanced this country is in terms of the American experience and Americans. And education is the key to really respecting and embracing this country and the history of this country. I didn't say agreeing with it, but embracing what it was, and and how it created what we're in right now. And in order to do that, you have to give respect and teach and learn your history. And so the African American experience is central to the building of this country and the formation of it being one of the richest countries in the world. It's through slavery. Okay. So we have to recognize that and say, okay, that was a part of our history. And to erase it, like we talked about erasure earlier, it's just ridiculous to me. It makes no sense. And so we have to learn how to collectively look at all of our individual experiences and to value them, and, not to give voice clearly, but also space in our history books, because we want our, I have my colleagues from Europe, and I was hanging out with, it was a grad school, and I had a colleague from Poland, and he was a physicist, interesting cat. And we used to sit down and talk, and he would just give me this amazing history lesson. I mean, I knew this, but I was learning at the time and had learned before, but he would give this just wonderful background, American history, and then he would talk about European history, and then we talk about Polish history. And when you talk to a lot of, Europeans, they have that educational background of their country. And for us to go out in the world and call ourselves educated from a developed world country, and you don't understand your history, is just shameful. And so we have to ensure collectively that we are valuing each other, and we are embracing the world that we're in. And there is going to be a lot of shifts and changes. We know population changes in this country. We know the last election, we saw how that shook out, in terms of the numbers and people, and it's to me, it's like, okay, we can see that we are living in a more diverse country, but we are not teaching from that perspective. And when we don't do that, we erase part of our history, and that's just ridiculous. That I just never understood that, and maybe it's because I'm a librarian, but I just don't. So I am totally an advocate for more education. I am an advocate for the true representation of the history of this country and teaching it to people. And that's why you always will have and need Black Studies programs, because the African American experience is essential to this country and to understanding how we got here today. And the sad part is that a lot of people who don't really don't and may have, good intentions, but really have not learned history and the way in which they can understand that, come to the universities. And this is a place that we are open to teaching history in its fullness and the representation from all perspectives. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And I value that. And so I can tell you, when I first came to university and started taking, my history classes, my African American studies classes, and it just blew my mind so much that I did not know. The Chinese Exclusion Act, you know, um, from slavery to the formation of whiteness in this country, to a very gendered perspective from the 18th Amendment to the 15th Amendment. Just these wonderful, wonderful lessons and this perspective that I was able to gain from learning about my country. And it just blew my mind, and how I was able to see African Americans, Asians, women, women of color, just in this beautiful, broad light, Latinos, and say, wow, this is the contributions that these groups of beautiful people have made to this country to make it the richest country, one of the richest countries in the world, and to make it as what it is today, and how can we make it better? Because anytime that you are, Obama used to say this, this formation of this perfect union. And I kept saying, why does he keep saying that? And I understand it a little bit more. It is because we're still trying to form that perfect union. We are not perfect. And so how do we go forward in doing that if you're silencing voices of the people who made this place what it is? It has to be a collective conversation, and it has to be an acknowledgement of the history that each group of people have played to make this country as rich as it has, and to put it in the global position it stands right now. From the Native American code talkers in the military, all the way to the farm workers, right? To the civil rights movement. We have so much and so many people from a myriad of backgrounds that have looked at this Constitution and said, let's be better. Let's be better. So in order to do that, we have to show you when we do this 1964 civil rights legislation. We have to show you when we are doing, pushing back against women getting paid less, right? And so I love that. And that's what I think we need to do more of, teach more of that. And I'm always going to be an advocate and passionate for Black studies and women's studies and Latino studies and Asian studies. It is not chopping us up or focusing on our differences. It is saying we're focusing on our difference to divide us. It is looking at our experiences and those different experiences and how they bond us in this union, bond us to this country and to creating this more perfect union. And so that's where my passion for Black studies comes from, and my passion for education from libraries. They are the great equalizers in this country. You can come here as an immigrant. You can come here. You can be living in poor communities. Go to a library, learn how to speak a language, learn more about other countries, learn more about this country. You can really expand your horizons And I like it because I remember Wyclef of the Fugees. He was saying, I didn't speak any English when I got to this country. But what I did was had a local library. And I went out to that library and I read everything I can get my hands on. And now I have a really good understanding of not just the formation of this country and how we're, where we came from and how to move forward and helping to form that so-called perfect union. But I can also contribute because now I can go out and get a job. Now I can have information on different careers that I can go into. I mean, he was just lauding the library and how it really contributed to who he was. And I thought that was just a wonderful example. And so that's where I come in terms of bringing those worlds together of that Black studies and that education and the fusion. And it just makes for a powerful information professional and a passionate one, but also it'll continue to bring attention and bring light to where we want to go in this country. And I love, someone contacted me the other day and asked me to buy his book. And it was about African Americans and the 1st Military Regiment. And, I was just so fascinated by this and I just had not heard this information. And I was just like, wow, this is so cool. And when someone sits down and reads this book, they are going to be enlightened about a group of people that they did not learn about, right? And that they come to this institution and they learn that particular, military and African Americans and what they contribute to this country. And that allows them to open their horizons and be able to see a little bit more deeper into the richness of this country and why that difference is important.
I think all of those things that you mentioned are such important reminders, particularly right now, being able to acknowledge the history of this country is integral to where we're at and the potential for where we can go. So building on that, what excites you most about the present and future of Black studies or your work within Black studies as a librarian?
So I think again, back to what I stated before, it is to, this beautiful discipline that is African American, Africana studies, Black studies, this beautiful discipline is integral to this country. There is no separating Black people, even though we have Black history. And that was, of course, Carter G. Woodson and all, just to try to get acknowledgement about, what Black folks have contributed, right? Because people wasn't even looking at that, right? But I see it as, it's ground zero. There's no way to get around it. There's no way to separate African American studies, Black studies, and education from the history of this country. So that is is that misnomer? Is that what they call that? A misnomer? And so, but for me as a librarian, I am passionate about education. I am passionate about teaching. And so that is always going to be at my core. I'm passionate about Black studies. And so when that comes together, I create a collection and databases for Africana Studies Department. And I pull in different authors and different databases to be able to feed the minds of the students and faculty and staff who come in. And my hope is that it opens your mind and it changes your mind so you operate in the world differently. And so there's no disconnect from me being having my African American studies and women's studies and library and science. Those are all one for me. It's like kind of, I don't know if somebody can say, how could you separate how do you separate your PhD from your UNIS, right? Like, yeah. Person, and then who are you with this PhD? And you're like, well, I did the work as a fusion, right? It's not 100% representative of everything that I am, but it is a representation of the things that I am passionate about. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. It absolutely does.
To separate, how would you do that?
I mean, I think that how you said it, right? Like I'm not necessarily able to separate my identities. Like they are what they are and they all make up who I am and the work that I do. Um
Yeah. Yeah, very much. And so, yeah, so people, and everybody will have their own answer, but for me, that's at the core because I, you know, understand the importance of education and then how that teaches you to value people, to value cultures, different people groups, and to go into, I learned about, biased. I taught a culturally responsive education course and just, teaching bias and teaching young students about that bias. And then a lot of times, you know this, and I know this, when we talk about identity and whiteness, a lot of white students don't think they have an identity until you have a conversation about them. Don't think that white people have a culture until we talk about and teach them about, yeah, we all have culture, right? So this
mhm,
identity is important. And then when we ask them, how do you separate, yourself from your Italianness or your Scandinavianness, people are perplexed, right? And we say, okay, that's right, because those are your identities and you're a myriad of things, right? And those identities collectively, with all of us, made up what this country is and how it got here. And now let's read the people who studied how that happened, right? And so, I was reading some stuff with Thomas Almaguer, racial fault lines, um, you know, and banning books is a no-no because those perspectives are important to be able to discuss why you think people are wrong and then why you think they're right. Right? Or
mm,
let me think about this perspective because I've never been taught this, right? Education is that it opens your mind and I would hope that when it opens your mind in that way, it allows you to think of things differently. And you and I teach, you love it when you see a student in class and they ask you a question and you explain it and then they start to think about it and you see them when they have that breakthrough, right?
mhm,
That's so satisfying. You're like, okay, it's not that you agree with my perspective, but you understand what I'm saying, right?
mhm,
Understand it, and now that you understand it, think about it because that causes you to think differently, right? And to come back with the next question, right? But that's what it is these building blocks, right? And so if we look at libraries and librarians as ground one of being able to, curate this information for you to build on when you come here, every class you take opens your mind. Every class you take challenges you. Every class and interaction with the faculty and other students, it enriches you as a human, as a person. And when you leave here, the idea after doing all that reading and talking to those, getting support from the librarians and back and forth with the faculty and engagement with the students and faculty, that you will be a better person than you were before you came. And so that is always my hope when someone interacts with me or I'm teaching a class. And so with my work, it is always these connections of this identity, being an African American woman, and understanding my history and being very proud of that history, and then having the opportunity to teach about that, and not just that, but also have librarianship as an underpinning of curating collections and sharing books with people to enlighten them from scholars who have just went out and done. I read. I had what's her name? It was from the 1619 project to Carolyn Anderson's. It is White Rage, which is really good. To the Covenant with Black America with Tavis Smiley 20 years later. I mean, just poverty, people discussing poverty and how the economic divide is widening, and just giving you a history of economics of this country. Education is key if you were going to understand, in my opinion, how to get to that next level because you understand the history, right? And so when we have these things going on right now in society, I have a lot of older scholars come and say, oh, this is remnants of, McCarthy era or this or that or this or that. And then you go back and look at that history and they're explaining to you and they're talking to you about what to read and just giving you perspective, because the whole idea of this is that history should not repeat itself, right?
mhm.
that we should learn from our history so we can make more informed decisions about how to go forward. We tell this to, right? You tell it to your kids, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Did you learn? And they're just looking at you with a blank face. Okay, you telling me to that wall, you didn't learn anything, right? And they're like, well, okay. And you're like, all right, let's break it down. Let's talk about it, right? So, that's very, very true when we're in these academic environments, and not just academic environments, but life. So yeah, that's where I see my passion just merge together, and why I love what I do, and encourage people to just, keep expanding their horizons, keep reading, keep, going into your libraries, talking to your library professionals, and engaging with them, because there's always something new and wonderful out there. And so,
Well, thank you. I think that that is a wonderful reminder and plug to leave it on. Go to the libraries, engage with librarians, take advantage of the knowledge, information, skills that are available in them. And thank you so, so much for being here today, Tahirah. It was great. It's always great talking with you and catching up with you. And I really appreciate all of the insight you were able to share on the podcast today.
you're welcome, Ashley, and I thank you and John for the invite. This has been just wonderful, and I appreciate the time to talk to me about my passion, my work, and just that next level of education, kind of that next step of where we're going. And so thank you. And I wish, if anybody has questions for me, you can shoot me an email. I would love to sit down and talk and engage. And so, and teach you more about libraries and how they can serve. So thank you again, Ashley, and you have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you. You too.
Bye-bye.